Good morning, class, the receiving schools and teachers.
Good morning, Mrs. Watangas.
How are you all this morning?
We are very well, thank you. And how are you this morning?
Very well, just like you all. Thank you. You may be seated. Let's quickly have a look at this. First group, what's this? Or what are these? Tacking pins. Good, tacking pins. Second group, what are they used for? What are they used for? For holding fabric or materials together. Third group, what's this? Again? A tape measure. Okay, I have the last four groups to tell us what a tape measure is used for measuring. Now, these are just two examples of some of the sewing equipment we looked at in the previous lesson, the names of the sewing equipment and their uses. One of them we looked at was a pair of scissors. Seventh group, if you can tell us what a pair of scissors is used for. A pair of scissors, what is it used for? Used for cutting material or fabric. Thank you. Fifth group, what is a needle used for? What is a needle used for? For sewing. Okay. Now, I'd like us to have a look at this word. And while we are looking at it and thinking about what that word is, we are still on the strand better living and sub-strand making things. Now, our lesson topic today is going to be on identifying the basic stitches that we are going to use in making the pillowcase. We will also be observing a demonstration how to make one of those stitches, and also we will learn to make one ourselves. Now, I'd like us all to read today's lesson activities. Every one of us together read.
In today's activities, we will be identifying stitches to be used in making the pillowcase, observing the demonstration on sewing the back stitches and sewing samples on pieces of fabric.
Okay, so in there we have, in the activities for today, we have a mention of the word stitches, Anybody who can tell us what stitches are? What are stitches? What are stitches? What are stitches? Teresa, thank you.
To be used to make pillowcase.
Come on again.
To make pillowcases.
Stitches used for making pillowcase. Used. Anybody has a different one from Trisha? Messi?
The patterns or ways of sewing.
The patterns?
Or ways of sewing.
Okay. Patterns or ways of sewing. Anybody else besides Teresa and Messi? Yeah.
Different patterns of sewing.
Different
Patterns of sewing.
patterns of sewing. Different patterns of sewing. Okay, now this is what we have from our friends. Patterns or ways of sewing used for making a pillowcase and some other garments. Different patterns of sewing. Thank you to those three for your contributions. Now, stitches. Stitches are the passing of a thread, a threaded needle through the fabric or material. Stitches or a stitch is the passing of a threaded needle through the fabric. Once this threaded needle, the threaded needle already has thread on it. So once it's passed through the fabric, it makes what? Makes stitches. Now another word we have in today's activity is observing. Observing. Observing is to watch carefully to see what is happening. Watch carefully. To watch carefully what is happening. The next word we have is demonstration. It's also mentioned there in today's activities. It's a performance which shows a skill or skills. Demonstration is a performance. Somebody does it, somebody is doing something, and whatever this person is doing is showing a skill or some skills. Now, I'd like us to have a look at this sample I have. This is one of the stitches that we will be using on the project, which is the pillowcase. This is the right side of that stitch, and this is the wrong side of it. Now this stitch is known as okay, the sample we have is the sample of the stitch known as back stitch. Back stitch. We will be using about 3 basic stitches, and these stitches are used when we are sewing with hands, not with sewing machine. We use back stitch with the other two, which we will be looking at later, this week and next week, which are used when we are sewing with hands. Now, I'd like us all to read together what the backstitch is used for. The backstitch, let's all read together.
The backstitch is a very strong stitch. It is the most common stitch used when sewing garments by hand. It is used on a garment when you would otherwise use stretching stitch.
Okay, so it says the backstitch is a very strong what? Stitch. And you use a backstitch if you are not sewing with a sewing machine. And because it's strong, it's able to hold whatever you are sewing for a long time. Now, we will be going through the steps of making or sewing a backstitch. I will be demonstrating now. When I am demonstrating, what are you supposed to be doing? You observe, and when you are observing, what are you doing? You are watching carefully. Observing, you are watching carefully as I go through the demonstration of sewing the back stitch. Let me see. Now, this is not the actual thread for sewing, but because I'm going to demonstrate, I'm using this wool just to make sure you can see clearly from where you are seated. The needle is also not the right size to use for sewing, a big needle. And they are all for the reason of making sure you see what's been shown, okay? So when it comes to sewing, you use the actual thread for sewing and the correct size needle to sew. Now, we come to the steps. The first one, it says, I'd like everyone to read together the first step. Okay, our first step in backstitch is begin with a double stitch. Now, we have four steps showing us how the double stitch is going to be done. And the first step we have says from above the fabric, that's the fabric, and from above, what do? We push the needle down through the fabric, okay? We push the needle down through the fabric. Now, let's see. Our needle is down through the fabric. B. Now what does B says?
Push the needle up through the fabric above half centimeters away from the fabric.
Okay, it says to push the needle up through the fabric about a centimeter away from the starting point. So let's see. Okay, I push the needle up. Now let's see our step 3. What does C?
Return to the starting point and follow the same way. First stitch me.
Okay, return to the starting point Now I'm pulling it through. I have to return to the starting point. That's the starting point. And it says I have to go the same way. So I come up to where the stitch is and pull it through. What have I made? The first stitch. Okay, we go to the next step, and once again I'd like you all to read.
Return to the starting point once again and push the needle down through the fabric. Second stitch made.
Okay, return to the starting point, push the needle down through the fabric, second stitch made. Now second stitch made, and that is our double stitch made. The first step in making the back stitch is the double stitch. What I've just shown you is making the double stitch. Okay, we go to the second step. Read together what it says for the second step in making the back stitch.
Push the needle up half a centimeter away from the end of the previous stitch.
Thank you. Push the needle up about half a centimeter away from the stitch that you have made. Okay, let's go to the third step.
Return to the end of the previous stitch and push the needle down through the fabric.
Okay, return. Okay, return to the end of the stitch is this stitch here. End of the double stitch. We push the needle down, and when we pull the needle through, we have made the first single stitch. That is the double stitch, and that's the first single stitch made. Now, what does it say next? Okay, repeat step 2 to the end. Now, I am not going to go right to the end. I'll just come halfway here, and we finish with the last step. So, I am to repeat step 2. Can I have you to read step 2 again, please?
Push the needle up half a centimeter away from the end of the previous stitch.
Okay, so push the needle up about half a centimeter away from the stitch, and we pull it. Okay, and go back to where the end of a stitch is, and we pull it down. We have made the second stitch. Now we are going to go like that. How long? The length of whatever you are sewing, you have to keep on sewing in that way until you come to the end. We will stop somewhere here. Okay? Push the needle up half a centimeter away from the end of the stitch. Go back, and we make the next stitch. Again, the same way, half a centimeter away, push the needle through. We go back, and our next stitch is made. Now I am going to finish doing the last step, and I'd like all of us to read together what the last step says.
Finish with a double stitch.
Okay, it says finish with a double stitch. I'd like you to watch carefully. We go once again 1/2 centimeter away from the end of the previous stitch. Now we go back to the end of the stitch, go down, pull it through. We are going to come up again where the end of that last stitch is. Pull it through, go back again, push it through, pull it down, come up to at the end of the stitch, and we have made a double stitch. Okay, now we have about 3 activities to do. You have just watched the demonstration on how to sew the back stitch. One of the stitches that we will be using in sewing the pillowcase. I'd like all of us to read together what it says for the first activity. Okay, so in your groups you are going to individually measure your piece of fabric which you were told to bring. And measurement is 15 by 10, and you cut them out. Now, if I can have the runners from each group to come and pick your materials. One, 6. Group 1. Who is the runner? Group 1. 6, 7, 2, 5, 3, 4. First activity, once again, you are to measure your piece of fabric 15 centimeters by 10 and cut it out. Now this is to the receiving school teachers. If you don't have a tape measure, you can use the rulers you have in your classrooms to do your measurement on the pieces of fabric. You can use a ruler or tape measure. Some of you have a piece of fabric there. Okay, if you don't, check to see how many of you don't have, and then you get the measure. This is already 10 centimeters wider, the width, but the length, you have to, okay, so that's 10, and that's 15 there. So from there, you cut it. You're using a ruler. This is already, the width is already 10 centimeters. What you do now, just measure your length, 15 centimeters. Oh, you already have 15 there. Now let's leave that one. Okay, cut it down and do the same all the way through. Do you have a piece of fabric? No, if you don't, that's long enough there. So he can give you a piece. Move your hands quickly. This is centimeters here. This is already 10. You just make sure you're 15. That's 10. 15 from there. Cut the next one. Cut the next so everybody has a piece. Your friends who don't have, give them. But if everybody has one, then the remaining piece of fabric, I'd like you to put it there. Once everybody has a piece of fabric there, please, the remaining piece of fabric, I'd like you to put them back in the plastics. Your tape measure, this is already 10 centimeters wide. Only measure your, okay, there. Okay, that's 10, that's 10, and that's 5, that's 15, huh? So there. Cut it and then do the same to the others. Just pull it. Don't worry about it. You have yours already, don't you? Okay, this is okay. You already got yours. But just make sure to see whether that's the correct what measurement you have. Okay, you put it down. You put your what down like this. Hold it. And this scissors is not sharp. Let's see. We spoiled it making this classroom. We will be going through it, so you have to cut your fabric first. Has everybody got a piece? Okay, cut the where you have measured, please. Everyone has a piece. Okay, remaining piece of fabric, put it back. You will need it for the next time. Now while you are cutting your piece of fabric, I'd like you to look at the screen to see what the next activity and do that, please. Get whatever color you want to use. When you finish, these ones all go back into your plastic. If you lose them, you won't get any because that belongs to, that one belongs to your group. You will be using that, all that thread for your, you just thread your needle. The activity is only to thread the needle and that's all. You will be told what to do later. You have to move your hands quickly. Now we should be all on the second activity. That is threading our needles with a piece of thread. Yes. Just choose any color you want. Yeah, any color you want. But don't forget, all these reels of thread belongs to your group and you have to take care of them. You have to count them to see how many you have. You already threaded yours. When we went through the demonstration, you have to move your hands quickly. Don't forget the remaining piece goes back into the plastic because you will need it for the next two samples. What do you want? Scissors, tape measure. Hold this one. Your arm's length. How far your hand can go out. Okay. We get yours done. Yeah. Wait. Okay, you cut it. Wait. Okay, cut it straight down. Okay, get the scissors and you cut it down. Bring your what? Now when you thread your needles, your thread must be your arm's length. Okay? How far your hand can reach out. You don't have to make it very long that it gets tangled up. So the length of your piece of thread depends on your arm's length. Okay, so when you do, you stretch your hand out like that, and then you can get it cut off. My dear, I had it what? I had it tangled up here. You should have your piece of fabric cut, your needles threaded. Now let's all look together at the third activity. What does it say? I'd like everyone to read together what the third activity says. Okay, now listen. I am going to go back to the step once again. The steps that you have seen me demonstrate, I will go back through it once again. So you should have your needles threaded, your piece of fabric cut, so you are ready to begin as we go through the steps together. Okay. Now let's just look through quickly. One is to, from above the fabric, you push the needle down through the fabric. Okay, you all should do that. We go to the second where it says push the needle up through the fabric about 1/2 centimeter away from the starting point. C, return to the starting point and follow the same way. First stitch made. D, return to the starting point once again and push the needle down through the fabric. Second stitch made. 2, you are to push the needle up 1/2 centimeter away from the end of the previous stitch. 3, return to the end of a previous stitch and push the needle down through the fabric. First single stitch made. Now the 4th step, it says you are to repeat step 2 to the end, and the 5th you finish with a double stitch. Now this is to the receiving school teachers. You are to get all those steps. I hope you got all those steps written up on your board. So you will help your students in your own time to go through those steps in sewing the sample of backstitch once again. Now if I can have everyone to put their what down first, whatever you have down. Go through it later. Now if we can all have a look at the next lesson's activity. What does our next lesson's activity say? Now that tells us that we have another lesson on sewing back stitches. And this time you are expected to sew it neatly and follow the correct steps. A key word for this lesson, I'll have groups 1 and 2 to read that for us. Okay, our key word is basic stitches, and from the basic stitches we have the stitch which is known as the back stitch. Now, to the receiving school teachers, please make sure your students have all the resources required for tomorrow's lesson, which is still on sewing samples of back stitches. And with that, good morning class, the receiving schools and teachers. Thank you all and have a good day.